as we're about to embark on the review of a very important piece of legislation that will affect your people. It will assist in business as we go along and will make the quality of life of our people better. We ask for your intervention. We ask for your guidance. We ask that whatever we do and whatever decisions we take today, that we do so in your name. For these and other mercies we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you very much, Member Hilton. And if the Secretary can record that the meeting was called to order in advance of the prayer, I'd appreciate it. Let me welcome members of the Joint Select Committee, as well as members from the OPC, AG Chambers, Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, and of course, from the Jamaica Customs Agency, to the first meeting of this committee for the year 2022. We got a lot of good work done in 2021. And while I just begin by wishing you all the very best for 2022, it is certainly my hope that very soon in 2022, the work of this committee will come to a close and we'll be able to move towards tabling an improved bill on the floor of the Parliament, with passage to come a few months after. So I just want to thank you for all the work that you have put into this process so far, and to ask you to just bear with us for just a little while longer. We are nearly there, and with your help, we'll get there pretty soon. Commissioner, do you have any apologies for absence?
Chairman Minister Johnson Smith and Member Robinson will be there.
Okay, thank you. All right, let us, the minutes of the last meeting held on October 7th have been circulated. Are there any amendments to the minutes? If there are no amendments, may I have someone move for the adoption of the minutes, please?
So move, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Webby.
Seconded.
Seconded by Minister Dunn. Thank you very much. Are there any matters arising from the minutes, Bailey?
Chairman, I think the technical team is to review some of the clauses.
Indeed.
There are some that the committee had to review, and there are some schedules.
Indeed, thank you. Where we had got last time, if you will recall, we had finished going through the bill as drafted. There were some policy matters that needed further review for a position to be adopted, and that has taken some time. That's why we haven't met since the last meeting in October, because those policy positions required consultation with other ministries, consultation with industry, and took until now to resolve. And what we plan to do at this meeting is to share those policy positions, and with the agreement of the Joint Select Committee, have those policy positions be adopted by the Joint Selection Committee, and would form, which would mean that they would form some of the amendments that would come out of the Joint Select Committee process. Just in terms of us providing a broad sort of forecast of our work that remains, we would go through that. And then my expectation is that the list of amendments, including the ones that have been circulated, and I ask you to familiarize yourself with what has been circulated so far. That list of amendments will be updated with the policy positions that are adopted today, and that have to be reflected in the bill, as well as any editorial changes that are necessary to those amendments that you have in your possession. Once those updated amendments are circulated, we will give committee members at least a week with those amendments to go through, and then we'll have another meeting where we will move for an adoption of the amendments to form part of the report of the Joint Select Committee. So our business for today is to consider the policy positions that I'm going to ask Hazel Edwards to take us through. And these policy positions would have had the benefit, as I mentioned, of consultation with the ministries that they concern, and as the case may be, the industries. Over to you, Ms. Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. Right, Chairman, one of the first issues, starting with the schedules, as Ms. Bailey had noted.
Are we meeting in person?
No, virtual. Oh.
I'm sorry, I did not hear the inquiry.
No, my phone was unmuted, and you heard a part of a conversation.
Okay, all right. One of the first adjustments that the technical team is recommending is a rearrangement of the provisions of the first schedule. And so if we're looking at what I have as numbered, if members are using their bound copy of the bill, then it would be the schedule that begins on page 189. So it's identified as the first schedule, customs tariff. And you notice there's a table of contents. Now the team is proposing some reorganization, because we note that the table of contents, we have general note, abbreviations and symbols, list of titles of sections and chapters, general rules of interpretation of the harmonized system, then part 1 being the schedule of rates, part 2 being the list of commodities ineligible, and so on. It is being proposed that the following changes be made. The schedule will continue to be known as the first schedule with the table of contents. It will then follow general note, abbreviations and symbols, list of titles of sections and chapters, general rules of interpretation of the harmonized system. Then it is proposed that there will be a section A entitled Schedule of Rates. Under that section A, there will be 3 subsections. The first subsection A, Schedule of Rates. And of course, we will defer to CPC in terms of whether we refer to the subsection as subsection 1 or subsection A. But the first subsection, which we've referred to as A, would have the schedule of rates. So instead of part 1, the next subsection B will be the list of conditional duty exemptions to the schedule of rates. This subsection B will then be divided into 2 parts. The first part is part 1, list of commodities ineligible for conditional duty exemptions. The items to be listed under this part 1 of subsection B will be the items listed from tariff heading 0702. And I'll just take you to the particular page to assist you to follow. So it will be the items So what would form this part 1 of the list of commodities ineligible for conditional duty exemptions are the items, the list that is currently at page 769 of the bound copy of the bill. Currently, page 769 has a subsection that says part 2, list of commodities ineligible for conditional duty exemptions. But that we're proposing will now be the part 1 of the subsection B. And it will have all the items starting at tariff heading 0702.00.00 being tomatoes, fresh or chilled. And it will continue to tariff heading EX 96.07 slide fasteners. And that will be on page 778. So I hope I've explained that clearly. This part 1 of this subsection B, being the list of commodities ineligible for conditional duty exemptions, will be all the items from tariff heading 0702.00.00, tomatoes, fresh or chilled, all the way to tariff heading EX 96.07 slide fasteners. So that is from page 769 to page 778. Part 2 of this subsection B will also be the list of commodities ineligible for conditional duty exemption. So it too will have the same description, list of commodities ineligible for conditional duty exemptions we're proposing, but it will be comprised of a different list of items. And the items to be listed under this part 2 would be the items listed from tariff heading 0210, meat and edible meat, offal, salted in brine, dried or smoked, etc. And that is the information, that is the list that begins on page 779 of this bound copy of the bill. And it continues to tariff heading 9615.90.10 hairpins.
On page.
What page is that on?
I am at a disadvantage because I'm missing a few pages. I wonder if.
What's it 96? Oh, 797 is what I have.
797.
797.
Like it too. Because the series is very hard running. I think said this requires less work time.
Somebody has their phone unmuted.
Right. So that if that's confirming that would take us from tariff heading 0210, meat and edible meat, offal, salted in brine, etc., to tariff heading 9615.90.10 hairpins, which Chairman.
Correct.
from page 779 to page 797.
Okay, so,
Correct.
I didn't read it back clearly. So
This section A, as I mentioned, it will have 3 subsections. So I've just spoken to subsection B, and it's 2 parts. And then we will have a subsection C, list of goods in relation to which those subject to a 5% rate of duty immediately before 1st April 1994 are excluded from exemption under this schedule. And the reference to this schedule means the entire first schedule. Right? And those items, that list currently is at part 3 of the bill. So if we go back to 189, page 189, we will see that it is identified as part 3, but we're proposing that it be relabeled as a subsection C under this section A, read the schedule of rates. The first schedule I mentioned would have 2 sections. We just completed speaking about section A, and then it will have section B. Section B will be dealing with the list of total or partial exemptions. This section B.
Ms. Bailey. Perhaps. Just finish. I wanted to ask a clarifying question. Go ahead. Finish. I'll ask it afterwards.
This section B will have 2 parts. The first, part 1, is the list of total exemptions, and part 2 is the list of partial exemptions. Well, it will have more than 1 part, apologies. Section B will actually have 7 parts. 7 parts, I'll go through each one. The first one, part 1, is the list of total exemptions. The items to be listed in this part are those items that are now listed I'll just locate the page number quickly. Those items that will now be found at page 753. So we'll be starting at page 753. We look at page 753 of this bound copy. We will notice that currently
60 or 53?
753.
53?
Yes, 753. If you go to 753, you will see that currently we have a section 22. There's a subheading, section 22, total or partial exemptions. And there are a number of items that are listed there. If you look to the left column, you will see item number. And then there's a general heading that describes it. And then the description of the articles and the duty rate, and then the unit for duty. And currently, there are a total of 39 items listed under this section 22, which takes us from page 753 to page 769. Now, the items to be listed under part 1 will only be a selection of these items. And so I'm going to identify the ones that would fall under part 1. And those would be the item number 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Those are the items to be listed under this part 1. Item
Sorry,
1.
Sorry, Don
Yes.
Webber here. Maybe I missed it, but can you just explain to me the rationale of the item that you just read out of why they're in part 1, just from the higher level of, so I can just get it in my head.
Well, can I?
Sorry, let me just turn on my video. Sorry about that, Hazel. I just want to know the rationale first before we go through the numbers, and so I can understand.
But I don't want to.
Don, I mean, I had indicated that I wanted to ask a question previously, but thought I'd wait until the end to sort of understand. But now that you've asked the question, may I put it in a slightly broader context, Chairman, just to understand what is happening, because I had a similar kind of concern as Don had, which is, so we're making these adjustments. Are they purely, first of all, are they purely administrative and for functional, or are they impacting on substance of, are we making changes and adjustment in the process? So that, for example, we just passed a list of resolution in the House recently affecting goods, both under the Cuba Caricom arrangements and also under the WTO arrangements as it relates to agricultural commodities. Are these related in any way to those resolutions so that they are making substantive changes to the harmonized schedule, or these are purely administrative and functional? I'm not clear, and so I join Member Webby in his quest to get some clarity as to exactly what is this exercise about.
Yes, thank you, Member Hilton, for that question. It is not purely administrative, but it is also not intended to change anything. These changes are intended to preserve the existing benefits that have been granted, and the articles that are listed on the different parts are treated differently. So although it is one first schedule, you will find that, for example, the items.
Here's we need an even higher level than that. So what we are trying to do here is to have one act that has all information, or to do with customs, including the schedules that describe where exemptions are possible, what duty rates are, et cetera, in one place. We are coming from an act passed in 1940 odd, with several amendments since then, and a scattering of schedules in many, many different places, and we're trying to consolidate. In that process of consolidation, some things were left out of different parts, and because even in cases where everything is in this book, because the treatment of an item depends on the section that it is in. So the body of the bill says for all items in section A, this applies. For all items in section B, this applies. For all items in section C, this applies. And in going through and tidying up items that should be in section A in order for the policy treatment to be consistent and not change from what happens now, we're actually in C, by way of an example. And so this is a tidying up. Part of what Heather is going through is a tidying up process. Later on, she'll go through things that have to do with tax policy, which is outside of the remit of the committee, but that need to be included in this bill if we are to have one document where we can find all of this material. So those items to do with tax policy that were not already represented required consultation with other entities, and she'll explain them as they go along, but they're tax policy matters that need to be represented here. But what we've gone through so far is simply to ensure that the bill does not inadvertently change benefits that already exist. So it's a tidying up because we are doing the very ambitious thing of trying to have all the schedules in one place and in the same place that the act is.
Indeed,
Minister, can I just ask one clarifying question? And it's clarifying, I just need to recall. In the event, in the normal course, where an item or items are given different or differentiated treatment under as a tax policy matter, is that purely an internal matter, or that comes in a normal way to Parliament for its negative resolution or affirmative resolution and then gazetted? Just remind how that process works.
So the things to do with rates that are applied, whether those rates are duty rates or ASD rates or so on, they are usually documents that have passed through a parliamentary process, and that process may differ depending on what the item is and what the foundation documents say. But they're listed in schedules, and those schedules ultimately come through a parliamentary process, similar to what the stuff that you have referred to in your previous remarks. The process to get there is that it goes through the tax policy process, which is a process certainly with respect to customs matters that Jamaica Customs Agency, the Tax Policy Division of the Ministry of Finance, are integral to, but they would consult with others before making a policy determination. But what we're doing here, certainly what has been described so far, is just simply to ensure. I know it sounds a little tedious, and I beg for it has, we have to do it in committee. We can't do it out of committee. It's a bit tedious, but it is simply tidying up to make sure that these items are treated the same after this legislation is passed as they were treated before. And in this cases, these are benefits. We wouldn't want those to change without the intent of having them change.
Understood, Minister. I'm a lot clearer now, Minister. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Senator.
Yeah.
Remember,
but you said there will be some later on that have been treated to tax policy.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Later on, we're gonna, and I don't want to talk about it, to spend too much time talking about it now because we're talking about it later. But it's a very easy example to make the point. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has embassies and consulates and operations around the world. Ministries sometimes close those consulates and people have to come home and things are repatriated. Right now, what has happened until now is that every time that happens, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has to approach the Ministry of Finance for a waiver to bring back the government items that they want to bring back. By government items, I mean, certainly you're not going to bring back the chairs and the desks in City A, but there are other items that you might want to ship back to Jamaica. And a waiver has to be sought from the Ministry of Finance to get that done. What we want to do with this Customs Act is just to make it a standard procedure, that you don't need a waiver to do that. The Customs Act will provide that if a consulate or a ministry is closing down or whatever, and the goods are repatriated to Jamaica, those goods will come in duty-free. But to get, for that change had to go through a tax policy process. Ministry of Foreign Affairs would have got in touch with the tax policy division of the Ministry of Finance. I mean, this has been in place for decades, right? But it's just under, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who's a member of this committee, who has had a couple of experiences with this repatriation and going through the waiver process. Look, why don't we just do it more efficiently? And the consultation took place, tax policy agreed, got into us with customs agreed, but it has to be, if we want one compendium or one document where all of this information lies, and the process to get it into this document has to come through the committee. But it's a little different, as you can imagine, from the clauses of the agreement that we go and debate and talk about here in this forum. So we just ask for your forbearance, and Hazel will explain them as she goes along.
No, got you.
Yeah.
Got you. Thank you, Minister.
Right. So I mentioned under this section B, I said it had 7 parts, and I spoke about part 1, which is a list of total exemptions, and identify the items that would fall there. So it's the selection of the items listed between pages 753 and 769. Some of those are to fall under part 1, right? And I mentioned them 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Part 2 of this section B is the list of partial exemptions. It will have an introductory statement. We propose to indicate that goods falling under this part shall attract the duty rate stipulated in this part. The items to be listed in this part 2 are those now listed at items 15 to 24 and 26 to 39. Part 3 of section B will now be, and if we were to go back to the very beginning, as it were to go back to that table of contents to guide us again. So if we were to go back to page 189, we would see that productive inputs relief for the production of primary products and the manufacture of goods is now listed as part 4. We're suggesting that that be renumbered part 3 of this subsection B. We're proposing that part 4 of this subsection B would then be productive inputs relief for the tourism industry. Part 5 will be productive inputs relief for creative industries. Part 6, productive inputs relief for the healthcare sector. And part 7, goods imported for meetings, incentives, conventions, or expositions.
And again, this reordering is just to, because of how the bill is structured, it refers to the parts. So what is here is an error. What's printed in your document is an error if the document is a stand as it is, and we just have to reorder the numbers so that the right percentage is applied to the right groups of items. That's all that's happening here. All right, move on, Hazel.
All right. Then some further adjustments to be made. Looking at the total or partial exemptions.
All right, let me just introduce it, and then you take us through the technicality. So this one now, let me turn my camera on. So this one has to do with what I was describing earlier with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but it's a little more than that. What is being proposed here as a policy change is to extend the categories of persons designated as foreign service officers. And foreign service officers, when they come home to Jamaica, when they return to Jamaica under the Customs Act, they're entitled to certain, and jump in here if I get this wrong at any point, but they're entitled to certain, to bring goods back duty-free, right? They're employed to the Jamaican government. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs sends them abroad as foreign service officers for a tour of duty. When that duty ends and they return to Jamaica, they bring their goods back, their possessions, etc., back duty-free. The proposal here is to extend that designation of a foreign service officer for the purposes of this act to employees of other government entities that, as part of their official duties, are required to be stationed overseas for government business for at least 3 years. So we know from experience that it's not only persons who are attached to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs who sometimes have to be posted overseas for 3 years. Sometimes you might have somebody who is employed to JAMPRO, and JAMPRO has a particular thing that it's trying to do in Germany, and JAMPRO said, or in better example, in Geneva, and JAMPRO says, I want an officer to be in Geneva for 3 years. That's an example. What happens now is that when that person returns, you have to go through a waiver process. The principle is the same, that if the government sends you abroad for 3 years and you're coming back, we don't want to charge you to come back. So, and we don't want to have an inefficient process that you have to come and apply to the Minister of Finance for a waiver. So we're proposing to extend it to other government entities where persons are sent abroad on government business for 3 years. It would also, the proposal is also to extend it to if the person is required to be employed to the government ministry permanently, or sorry, the other conditions would be the person is employed to the government ministry permanently or in a contract for 3 years, or is seconded from another ministry, department, or agency of the government under similar arrangements as a permanent employee. So this would apply to anyone who is either on contract for a minimum period of 3 years or a permanent employee who is then stationed overseas. Or if you are in Ministry A and you're seconded to Ministry B, and then Ministry B sends you overseas, it would apply. And the person will be eligible for the benefit on the completion of each tour of duty. So if you go away for 3 years and you come back for 3 years and you go back away for 3 years, you know, right? It's just each time it happens, this would be applicable. And the proof of eligibility for this benefit shall be provided to the Commissioner of Customs in the form of the manner specified in the rules to Customs. So here we consider it necessary to extend this to other entities of government. And you can readily think that people like the Jamaica Tourist Board, I mentioned JAMPRO, the JDF, regularly have employees who are so assigned. And this is just to make the process of government more efficient by providing for it upfront. So that's the proposal. Hazel, is there any, maybe I covered it, but what, you want to add anything?
You're muted, Hazel.
Just to make one clarification, which is that the benefit that the Foreign Service Officers, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they don't now enjoy the benefit. It was contemplated to introduce it in this legislation. It will be the returning residents who would enjoy it now. But it was recognized when the bill was being prepared that it was necessary for foreign service officers of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to be assigned. And then subsequent to that, the Ministry of Finance engaged further and realized it was necessary to also include officers of other ministries, as you stated, Minister, and all the criteria that you indicated.
I agree with that, Minister. I think it makes a lot of practical sense. So that has my support. I agree with that.
Thank you, Senator. So as Hazel was saying, the foreign service officer component of it is in the bill that you have already. We're just making we're making an additional thing today, January 20th, to broaden the definition of foreign service officer beyond the Minister of Foreign Affairs to include, as I just described. All right, if we can take that as accept, let's move on to the next one, which is the one I mentioned earlier now, the repatriation of furnishings for embassies. And I described that earlier, the challenge that arises. And so the provision would be inserted to permit household effects and other goods belonging to the Jamaica High Commissions that have been closed to be repatriated to Jamaica free of import duty. Currently there's no tax relief provision in the Customs Act to enable goods belonging to Jamaican diplomatic missions located overseas to be repatriated to the island. So each time it happens, there is, you take up bureaucratic time by preparing an application, going through the process, because the tax policy, the financial secretary, go to the minister for approval to do something that we know ought to be approved. So the idea is to put that in, to include that here. So I take it understood and agreed.
Indeed, Minister. I would just want to make one before we move on, one quick, which is a minor typo, but just for the purposes of the minutes, that on page 758, at the very top, we see the word foreign services officer has been misspelled. So just for that word, F-O-R-E-I-N-G, to be deleted and replaced with the correct spelling.
And we would just, I take it from the, how these committees proceed, that if, grammatical changes, if they're found, we can make those grammatical changes. Officers to officer, as the case may be.
So Minister, after the bill is reviewed here in the Joint Select Committee, a report goes to Parliament on the bill. If amendments are made and accepted, not typos, because typos are always corrected under the slip rule.
Right.
Require an amendment being proposed to deal with them. Then we would have the stage of where the actual bill is printed. So there are stages that would take care of the errors.
Of the typos.
Right.
If I would move on then to part 8, goods imported for meetings, incentives, conventions, or expositions. And this is more, I believe, bringing it to the attention of the committee and perhaps requesting any guidance if needed from CPC, and just to ensure that there's clarity as to what is the policy intent there. Following
recording stopped.
The discussions that have been happening here at the Joint Select Committee, some entities, such as the Ministry of Tourism and the JTB, have raised questions regarding...
Hazel, just a minute. I got a message that the recording has stopped. Could the administrator just check that? What it means.
Hello, sorry, I got kicked off there. Apologies. I don't know what happened. I was in mid-sentence. Am I being heard? Bailey, am I on?
Yes, yes, Minister. I think we are just awaiting the restart since the recording had stopped.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Minister, are we still here?
I'm here. Is the recording
Oh,
started?
I haven't seen the notification. We normally get something that says the recording has started or it has stopped. So it stopped. So I guess we are all just waiting from the administrator to find out what's happening.
Okay, thank you.
There was Ms. Cunningham is saying in the message that there was a power surge at the parliament and the internet has not returned. So I think we're delayed.
Okay, thank you. Apologies, everybody. I ask you just to hang on while they work on it. Another reason we have to make sure the new parliament has backup power.
I mean, we have to make sure we get the new parliament in the shortest possible time.
We do have a generator at the parliament. That's all we did.
As well, yeah, well, but
No man, there's a generator there.
I don't know why
But
it's not.
sometimes, but sometimes when the generator is on, the internet still chips out. I've noticed that.
Oh, he's now saying we can continue the meeting.
Oh, okay, it's on.
Doesn't mean it's recording, but all right, let's go ahead. Thank you for
Recording
that.
in progress.
This meeting is
Wonderful.
being recorded.
Wonderful. Where was I? Oh, I think I was beginning another of the yes, I was talking about that the vision to broaden the tourist product to include the subcategory of meetings, incentives, conventions, and expositions, commonly called MICE. And that is an industry where people come, people convene in a location that has the required amenities and infrastructure for a conference in the numbers of hundreds or even more, thousands. And that industry has a unique requirement for the organizers of such conventions to bring in material and paraphernalia for such an event. Under the current regime, it's very difficult to do. It's not efficient. And the idea is under this new customs that we want to be able to facilitate this kind of activity. So based on discussions with stakeholders, including the Ministry of Tourism, which has been a champion of this, the Jamaica Customs Agency, the Jamaica Tourist Board, a request was made that clarification be provided in the terms of the word consumption used in the legislation. And bear with me, I want to bring everybody up to date on this. Subject to the provisions of this part, goods are exempt from customs duty where the commissioner is satisfied that the goods are imported for consumption otherwise than by sale at a meeting, incentive, convention, or exposition approved. So the idea is that if you bring in something to sell to your guests, then that should be dutiable. But if you're bringing in pens and T-shirts that you're going to give away, and it's a we call it consumption, it's an expenditure item for you as an organizer, those ought to come in without payment of duty. It would be equivalent to a productive input relief. It's a part of doing the business, the MICE business, so to speak. So the Customs Act that we have in front of us contains a provision to allow goods imported for MICE to be exempt from the payment of customs duty. And consumption in this case is usually T-shirts and plaques and trophies, banners, posters, token gift items, among other things, and they're usually branded. Consumptions would not include larger items of equipment or vehicles, as there's a procedure already in place for temporary imports of these items. The Act allows the Commissioner to determine the types and value of the security required, if any, to secure the revenues in cases where the items are imported and are expected to be subsequently re-exported. Items falling into this category are usually equipment. And Hazel, here, you're saying that what you were saying about the CPC here, you want to say that, deal with that part?
Minister, could I just ask a question? Would this cover, for example, in the area of film, where a crew is coming in to do a video shoot or to do a short film and they have the cameras, etc., or is that captured somewhere else?
Yeah, no, this is not intended for that. That's captured in other provisions that say you bring in equipment, expensive equipment, etc., that you are using temporarily in Jamaica, whether it's film or it's entertainment. Well, film is entertainment, but whether it's film or it's music, you can bring it in duty-free by filling out a particular form, and in some cases, posting a bond. Because if, we're talking about very expensive pieces of equipment and you abscond and actually sell it and make a profit, the customs has to have, the revenue has to have the means to recover. So, so yes, the short answer, there's a provision for that already. This is specifically dealing with the meetings, incentives, convention, and exposition subsector. Hazel, over to you.
Minister, Madge here.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, I was just saying that in terms of the assistance that we would need here, it is persons have indicated concern in terms of how we use the fact that we use the word consumption. And we were just seeking the guidance of the CPC if, based on our policy intent, which is, as you just pointed out, to include items, the t-shirts, the items that will be used by the persons that are at the convention, if that term sufficiently addresses the matter and should not be a concern for the persons who have indicated that they are indeed concerned with the word consumption. So that is where we're just asking the CPC to see if she could give us any guidance, if there's any need to actually make any further amendment to that section.
Chairman, before the CPC comes in, if the intention is that items brought in and used for the occasion or for, I mean, the consumption in that case relates to use for the event. Is that so? For which approval?
Yes, consumption for the event. Yes.
Right. So those clarifying words could be added for an avoidance of doubt what consumption would mean in that context. CPC can shed some light because it's not unusual for statutory provisions to clarify for the avoidance of doubt and for that to be included in the provision itself. But the CPC can better indicate.
Thank you. Well, in this case, consumption not being defined, it would have its ordinary meaning, which would be the action of using up a resource. One could consider whether that adequately meets the concerns that were expressed.
I think I share the view of the Attorney General, Madam Minister of Legal Affairs, constitutional reform, that the clarifying sentence could be added because consumption here in the norm, if it's used in a normal way, you consume things and it disappears. Here, the idea is mainly around use and not consumption in the way of sales, certainly not. That's not included, but assuming if you could imagine that if you have food as part of what is a different kind of mices, you could presumably have a food fair, and those are imported, and you eat or drink them. As the question then would be, is it part of the convention? Is it a normal part of the convention where it's not sold? But taste tests are part of that. So I think it does need some clarifying words and not just leave it to the normal meaning.
Chairman, in the rest of time, we could just flag the provision for follow-up so that.
No, but I don't think we need to. I think the advice I've heard in this in the exchange just now seems to be sufficient guidance. I mean, right. if it needs to be further revised, we can, but this committee has to come to an end at some point. The advice I've heard, I think we can proceed with. Okay, so we can do that, and then
let's ask the CPC to
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks. The next item. You want to deal with the next two items, Hazel, please?
The next item, I'm wondering what's the most efficient way to deal with it. It is the item listed, the list of goods in relation to which are subject to 5% rate of duty immediately before the 1st of April 1994 are excluded from exemption under this schedule. We had spoken about it before. You recall that in the new arrangement, what is being proposed is that the items listed there be removed, and we are proposing an updated list. And that is because when it was looked at, there were a few errors in the tariff codes that were listed, right? So when it was double checked, it was noted that there were a few errors. Those items, I'm wondering what's the easy way? The easiest way is about 63 items. I'm wondering if I don't know if I have
page numbers, that's all. We don't need anything more than that.
power to share my screen. But what we had done, what the team had done was just simply prepared the list afresh so that it could just be inserted.
Okay, so I mean, items of error, we
Right.
the committee will, accept what the customs agency is putting forward. This is where your expertise is.
All right, so we've identified it as an appendix 1, updated tariff headings. So what I will do, Minister, is share that with both the CPC as well as Ms. Bailey, so that I guess perhaps it could be appended to the minutes, so the persons could see what we're referring to as the appendix 1.
Okay.
The other item to be addressed has to do with productive inputs relief for the tourism industry. And that is to be found at page.
Doesn't seem to be 592 in the 2020 bill.
On mine, I'm at 813.
813.
Page 813 on my bound, bound book. Okay. Then looking at item 4, paragraph 4. Paragraph 4 provides for motor cars, which the commissioner is satisfied are imported by a taxpayer for use as rental cars, shall be exempt from common external tariff as follows. A, the exemption applies to 1, a total of no more than 1,000 motor vehicles per year imported as rental cars. I believe the ministry, the query from the ministry and what the ministry wishes to make clear is that, and seeking the guidance of CPC to ensure it is clear, that this is 1,000 motor vehicles per year for the entire rental car sector.
Which
So
is,
not for any.
Just to be very clear, that is what obtains now. We just want to make sure that the ministry tax policy, just want to make sure that the language that's used here in trying to tidy things up and put it in one document, that it means exactly what exists now. The intention is not to change the policy.
Yes. So if you look, for example, at paragraph 6 of that same provision going down.
So Chairman, can I ask a clarifying question on that one? So my understanding here is that that we're allowing 1,000 motor vehicles for the rent-a-car industry per annum. And that is the figure that we're using now based on, I guess, historical data.
No, that Don, I mean, Senator, that obtains now. That's an existing policy. And as I described earlier, there is a process for policy change.
Okay, all right, I got you.
Intended for the policy to be changed, but because we have lifted language and put it here and we're trying to consolidate and so on, there's a concern that we could inadvertently make an unintentional change. So using this form to put it back to CPC to ensure that when you look at 4 and you look at 6, for example, where another 40 vehicles are for a subsector.
Yes.
The policy that exists today, which is a policy that we are not changing at this point, is that there's 1,000, the allotment is 1,000 for the entire rental car sector. We want to make it
Understood.
properly
Yeah.
captured.
Yeah, I know. I understood, Minister. I guess the point that I'm making, and I'm wearing my jumper hat for a little bit. That when I look on the future investments, tourism industry, I mean, it's unbelievable what we have on the platform. So that 1,000 maybe a low number in the future based on the number of rooms and all of that I'm seeing going to be invested in another 18 months. So I'm just wondering if we're kind of locking ourselves into a specific number. But as you said, it's a policy that can be changed, eh?
Yes, and there's a process for changing, and the change would be empirical. It wouldn't be like us sitting together saying, hey, should it be 1,500? No, it would be measuring the industry. It would be seeing how many cars are in inventory, how many cars are sold from the rental car industry into the so there'd have to be a proper analysis to determine.
Understood. And who would do that analysis, Minister?
Well, how these things work, Senator, is that the tax policy division would request that information.
Okay.
Ask questions, would request information, and that information would be used to make a decision.
Okay, all right. I guess one of the main points I want to make to my colleagues on the call here is that, I mean, from a JAMPRA's point of view, the potential growth for our tourism industry based on new investments is significant. That's one of the main points I'd like to make.
That's excellent to hear.
Happy to hear that, Don.
Minister, may I just weigh in that if the quantity, because I know that affects the revenue and your calculation, but if the quantity at any given time is a matter of what is approved by the cabinet, then we will just have to make sure that the process by which the change of the specification of that quantity is done is with ease, so that we're not coming back. So for example, it could be prescribed by order. Going forward, all orders, however, will have to go through a central process, because all of the subsidiary legislation relating to a main act of parliament will have to be in the same place as this act is now doing. So I just wanted CPC, between yourself, Hazel, and Madam CPC, to just check that for those provisions where a number is designated, but the number is likely to change when the need arises, that the process by which the change takes place is easy.
That's an excellent point, and that's where my head was going, Madam Ford.
I suspected that was your concern, that while you appreciate that the number may be fixed now, as the need arises, changes may be made. Minister Clark indicated that that will be a matter of policy, but you do not want it to be that you can't make the change with the ease, and then it has to go through the full legislative process again.
Agreed. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, Minister, I want to just hold on that a little bit. I know it sounds, it's
just a check, Minister. It's not a
changing one of these variables can significantly impact. So the fact that it requires a process is not a bad thing, because I want to just hold on that a little bit. Let's discuss it off air if we can.
Just to clarify, I appreciate that. That is why I say I know it's a matter of revenue. It's not that you're to change it whimsically. It's just a process that is used.
Right. I want to do that for everything, but for certain.
Right.
But items where I don't think this is the efficient forum to consult with CPC from the customs point of view. I think customs should consult with CPC and come back here with the proposal. So I would ask that happen. If you want, on reflection, language to tidy it up and to make sure that it is, what obtains today, please consult with CPC outside of the forum and come back to the committee recommendations after that consultation.
We're saying the same thing, Minister. I don't think the consultation could have taken place in the meeting now. It's just a signaling, yes.
Guided Minister.
Yeah.
I will just then move to, as I said, the other policy matters. The other issue in relation to the tourism sector has to do with table 3. It's at item 9. Item 9, that's on page 814.
Mm-hmm.
And the table 3, some additional items are to be added, 6 additional cuts of meat. I have identified it as Appendix 2 with the tariff codes, and so I will provide that information as well in terms of the policy decision being taken to add these additional cuts of meat to facilitate the sector.
Okay.
On the total or partial exemptions.
Just to be clear, I mean, these are stuff that they were added effective 2017, right?
Indeed.
Right. So what we're, again, for everybody's benefit, you know, our legislation.
They were approved by cabinet.
Neil. I mean, if you were to add up the pieces of documents that make up our custom regime today, I would want to hazard a guess that you'd be talking about how many separate pieces of document?
Several, so.
Huh? No.
Several.
Right.
50, 60, 70, 100? It would be a lot of different documents. So every time we, you know, we change something, but we don't have one place we can find everything. So what this is referring to is a change that was made in 2017. The, what do you call it? The Foundation Act didn't change. And so when they reproduce this table, they use the table that existed as at before 2017, because the change in 2017 is on a separate resolution somewhere. Tidying up to make sure that the table here on page 814 includes the changes that were added effective 2017.
Right, Minister.
Okay. All right, move on, please.
Going back to that list of total or partial exemptions, that is on page 758. Item 5 is to be deleted because it is already addressed on review under the Fiscal Incentives Act. And item 25, so that's item 5 dealing with clothing for indigent school children. And item 25 that deals with leaf of tobacco, also to be deleted.
And that's because that to be consistent with what happens now.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay.
And the Ministry of Education has an approved charity that deals with those imports. And if it's any manufacturing activity, there are provisions that treat with manufacturing.
Okay. All right, next.
It is proposed that at item 3, and this is now at page 755, dealing with baggage and household effects, it is being proposed that a definition of personal effects be inserted. The proposed definition is personal effects means all articles which a passenger may reasonably require for his or her personal use during the journey, taking into account all the circumstances of the journey. And the proposed adoption of that definition is intended to clarify what is meant by personal effects under these provisions. And it is adopted from specific Annex J of the revised Kyoto Convention.
And the bearing on this is that personal effects attract 0% duty.
Indeed.
So again, it's just trying to modernize our legislation to be consistent with treaties that we have signed, but also with modern life, and provide greater certainty to the categories of items for which exemption is granted. So you're not haggling with a customs officer on your re-entry to Jamaica. Unnecessarily haggling. All right, next.
Next, Chairman, the technical team was charged to resolve the issue relating to contingent rights in relation to the protocol on contingent rights that is a part of Caricom that Jamaica is required to implement. The team met, not just the technical team working on the Customs Act, but a particular technical team comprised of members of the JCA, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Finance, who were looking at this issue. And after several meetings, and having reviewed my instructions and their minute notes and so on, Minister, it's clear that this is not an issue that we will be able to treat with at this time in the legislation. And this is because the administrative rules relating to the implementation of the protocol are to be agreed at a regional level, and that agreement has not yet occurred. And so it may not be prudent for Jamaica to go ahead and put any provisions in the legislation now, since we don't know what will be agreed by the quoted. But we anticipate that, when that agreement is made, we will need to put it in our legislation. And so what the technical team is proposing is that we insert a provision that will enable the minister by order, subject to negative resolution, to be able to specify the categories of persons who may import goods under this part, the types of goods and the time periods within which the goods are to be imported, and to provide for such other matters as may be required to give effect to any obligations that Jamaica may have under the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. And we think that this will allow a gateway for these matters to be dealt with in a ministerial order, but by proposing that it be subject to negative resolution, it would still be subject to parliamentary oversight, so that we think, satisfy all the requirements, but not have to come back to the arduous process of amending the schedule. And so
I want to ask your, just for your agreement on this and your comment, but before doing so, so under the Caricom contingent rights, as members of Caricom states, the idea is that we will have, certain categories of persons will have the right to enter and to stay for, in other Caricom countries and to move our personal effects around. But the harmonized mechanism to give effect to this has not yet been adopted. A question was asked at a previous meeting, why are we not putting stuff here? Well, the answer is we have to wait until that mechanism is agreed, and it will specify the categories of persons who may import under this category, under this part, the types of goods, it will specify the time periods that are relevant, et cetera, et cetera. So we want to wait until, I think it's a sensible proposal from the technical team, that we wait until COTED decides on this. And of course, COTED, a very important member of COTED is Jamaica. And once that happens, along the lines that the Minister of Legal Affairs was saying earlier, to allow it to be easily inserted into the customs legislation, that we allow for whatever is agreed at COTED to be inserted by way of negative resolution.
I think that's forward-looking. Minister.
All right. Going to move on.
If I may move the minister to the other one, going to productive inputs relief for the production of primary products and the manufacture of goods, looking at page 803. 803, their provision is made for goods that are imported for the manufacture of goods in Jamaica to benefit from duty relief. But the policy position that had been taken was that goods that had been imported by an approved enterprise under the Jamaica Export Free Zones Act could not also benefit under the productive import relief provision. As you know, the Jamaica Export Free Zone Act was repealed, so that was an oversight, and we would wish to correct that but continue the policy that there should not be double dipping, and so provide that you would exclude goods that are imported for use by a developer or an occupant within the meaning of Section 2 of the Special Economic Zones Act.
So again, all we're doing here is adjusting this Part E to be consistent with the existing framework. When this Part E was originally drafted, Jamaica had a Jamaica Export Free Zones Act. We all know that that was replaced through the required processes by a Special Economic Zones Act, but the principle still applies. And the principle back then was this section does not apply to people in a Jamaica Export Free Zone, and similarly, it would not and ought not to and does not apply to persons in a special economic zone. So this just needs to be updated to reflect that. The Jamaica Export Free Zones Act, was repealed. It doesn't exist anymore. So it has no business being in this Section E.
To highlight another matter, Chairman, we had spoken to this before, and I believe there had been a general agreement in principle, but just to have it confirmed, this deals with advance arrival information for postal articles. And it is proposed that...
What about the creative industry amendment?
That's just because it's a bit of a typo, a technical matter. I just thought I'd deal with it.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, all right.
Minister.
Yes. Yes.
I just want to, I just wanted to signal, we just dealt with a provision, the incentive inputs into primary production, incentive into primary products. I think there is a need for a wider discussion, not here, obviously, just signaling about not just the supply primary product, but for Jamaica's participation in the value chain, global value chain. But that's a discussion to come. But we're dealing here with just primary supplies, primary manufactured goods. We need to look a bit further and to deepen that process.
Sure.
Well, so dealing with this issue of the advance arrival information for postal articles, it is proposed that clear language be inserted in the bill to impose on the Postmaster General an obligation to ensure that before the arrival of postal articles in Jamaica or before the departure of postal articles from Jamaica, a report is provided to the Commissioner detailing the estimated time of arrival or departure, as the case may be, the customs control area where the postal articles will arrive in or depart from Jamaica, as the case may be, and any other information prescribed by rules. The information is to be provided to the Commissioner within the time frame specified by rules. And it is, we of course will ultimately defer to CPC as to whether or not it is placed under the part dealing with postal articles, that is part 7, or whether it is placed at clause 56 as a new subclause 1. We would also wish it to be clear that the provisions of clause 57, which sets out overarching provisions dealing with reports under the Act and advance arrival reporting information, that clause applies to the advance arrival and departure information relating to postal articles. And it's particularly important because that clause 57 provides that if the Commissioner can obtain the information from a competent authority using electronic means, then we can waive the requirement for the report. And the two agencies have already at an advanced stage whereby the Post and Telecommunications Department facilitates the JCS access to an international electronic platform whereby we're able to pull down the advance arrival information, right, as a result of administrative arrangements between us. So we wish it to be in the act to provide for us to have the information, but to recognize that we can simply enter into administrative arrangements so that we can get that information efficiently. We propose that an amendment at clause 168 to just indicate that the term post office, which is used there, has the meaning assigned to it under the Post Office Act. We further propose that at clause 56, the word cargo, there's a provision there whereby the commissioner may make provision for other reports in respect of cargo. And it is proposed because cargo has a fairly limited definition and it excludes stores, unaccompanied, it also excludes accompanied or mishandled baggage, that instead of the word cargo, we utilize, it is replaced with the word goods to make it of more general application throughout the act, so that as changes occur in the future, we would have already put in a provision to enable those reports to come in if they are deemed necessary. We had also discussed.
Hazel?
Yes.
Just a second. But so my understanding is that you have allowed in the case of post office articles and other types of imported goods for there not to be the reporting requirement, using instead the administrative arrangements by electronic platforms. I didn't quite understand why that would not, well, I'm not sure it wouldn't apply, but you're saying it's more prescribed. Is that the use for goods more broadly?
Yes, utilize for goods more, but all what it is a sort of a catch-all provision, so that in the event that we had not provided for something specifically, and in the future, there is a need to have a reporting regime in relation to a particular item, then that can be adopted at that time. Okay. So it's really just intended, as I said, it really is a catch-all provision.
Okay, all right.
The amendment to the second schedule, we had discussed this as well. This has to do with the issue that had been raised by the Revenue Appeals Division and which the technical team had agreed with, which is the need to insert an amendment to treat with decision 6.1 of the WTO Technical Committee on Valuation. And it is proposed that the second schedule, which is the valuation schedule, that now appears at page 819 of the Act, be amended to insert language that provides that when a goods declaration has been presented and the commissioner has reason to doubt the truth or accuracy of the particulars or of documents produced in support of this goods declaration, the commissioner may ask the declarant to provide further explanation, including documents or other evidence that the declared value represents the total amount actually paid or payable for the imported goods, adjusted in accordance with the provisions of paragraph 8 of the second schedule. If, after receiving further information or in the absence of a response, the commissioner still has reasonable doubt about the truth or accuracy of the declared value, the commissioner may, subject to the right of the declarant to appeal. It may, subject to the right of the declarant to appeal, be deemed that the customs value of the imported goods cannot be determined under the provisions of paragraph 3 of the second schedule. And paragraph 3 deals with the transaction value. Before taking a final decision, the commissioner shall communicate to the declarant in writing, if requested, its grounds for doubting the truth or accuracy of the particulars or documents produced, and the declarant shall be given a reasonable opportunity to respond. And when the commissioner has taken a final decision on the matter, the commissioner shall communicate to the declarant in writing his decision and the grounds therefore. So it's just to, I guess, secure agreement in principle to words to give effect to decision 6.1 of the WTO valuation agreement.
And this is, Minister, to you, this is consistent broad with how this is treated in other customs, by other customs authorities?
Yes, several countries globally have implemented the decision 6.1 of the World Trade Organization Valuation Committee. So this represents a position that was adopted by the WTO, and Jamaica, as a member of the WTO, is certainly free to implement decision 6.1. And
I'm agreeing, I'm aware. My question is, because this is a very contentious issue, the whole matter of valuation has been and will continue to be. My question is whether this procedure is best practice in what would apply not just to Jamaica custom, but globally. And secondly, whether the World Customs Authority has opined on this or putting any and address this particular provision, 6.1 of the WTO agreement.
Well, Member Hilton, I'm not able to say if the WTO has opined on it. I think I would have to make a note and revert to you. Nothing comes to my mind immediately, but I know that there, were in the past, and there continues to be a lot of discussions among customs administrations about the issue of, false values that are submitted. And it is those discussions that ultimately gave rise to the decision, the issue being dealt with by the Valuation Committee of the WTO, because the WTO countries recognized that there was this need to have a provision whereby the customs administrations could reasonably challenge the values that were being presented. So I
my effort here is simply to make sure that it is, because there are arguments on both sides that I'm aware of. Yeah. And my effort here is to make sure that whatever is agreed on in this new act really represents a standard of best practice, and it's not just a Jamaica-centric approach, given our proclivity to really embellish things that I think we are now accustomed to and aware of, but that we find a resolution that is centered around some best practices. So you don't need to be detained, but I would like to know if you have some responses to the WCO, the World Customs Organization, and how they have treated this elsewhere, and the best practices.
I have made notes of it, Member Hilton. I will definitely, I can definitely think of one or two countries, but I will do a more extensive review. So the countries that have implemented this, and provide that information at the next meeting.
And World Customs Organization, let's check.
And WCO.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, Chairman, with your permission, I would want to raise not so much policy issues, but some additional matters.
Just to point out what was mentioned a while ago was a response. You remember when in our Joint Select Committee meetings, we heard from the Revenue Appeals Division, who had this concern, and the consultation has led to what was just described. I think here's what you have left are 4 errors in tariff codes, highly technical,
Yes, we will.
but have to be mentioned here because they are included in the printed document, and any change into the printed document that's not editorial or typographical, we need the committee's blessing, and it needs to be included as an amendment at the end of the JSC process. So as tedious as it is, just to quickly mention them, you want me to do the honor? Or you go ahead.
Well, oh boy, I'm just hoping now that my page numbers actually coincide. Let me just double check it quickly. Page 771. I realize that when we print the documents, we're looking at something different. Yes, page 771. Again, just a quick adjustment. It's the tariff heading. It's 6 from the top. Page 771, 6 from the top. Pineapples fresh, and the E is missing. Seems like a small thing, but.
And that's not typographical because it's not.
For the technical tariff persons, apparently it's quite a thing. So EX 0804.30.00 pineapples fresh. And in terms of printing, there is a need for the cells to be expanded to make the entire tariff heading visible at page 783. Heading 20.07, jams, fruit, jellies, marmalades, etc. Also at 783, heading 20.09, fruit juices, including grape, must, and vegetable juices, etc. You'll notice that you're unable to make out the other items that are on that heading. And page 787, at tariff heading 48.18. If I may, Chairman, quickly go to a few other matters in the bill itself, now leaving the schedule.
Yes, please.
Yes. Clause 184. Clause 184, it deals with the circumstances under which the commissioner may revoke an authorization. And there's a list of criteria there. But on further review, the technical team is proposing that in addition to the bases outlined at clause 184 for revoking an authorization, that 2 additional bases be added. And the first is that to permit the commissioner to revoke the authorization if the applicant has failed to provide the security required by the commissioner for the grant of the authorization, because some authorizations may be subject to security requirement, or, and this is intended as a catch-all, in accordance with regulations made under the Act, because it is recognized that while we have this general provision here, some authorizations may have specific rules governing their revocation, and there are authorizations that we may develop in the future that we're not able yet to contemplate what may be proper basis for revocation, and it may be dependent on, whatever international agreement or so that we are seeking to implement. And so it's proposed that we have a catch-all to allow the commissioner to revoke in accordance with regulations made under the Act. So if a particular authorization is established, by means of regulations, those regulations may set out how it is to be revoked.
Chairman, if I may, before we move from this clause, I'm looking back at it now and finding it a little odd because the circumstances under which the commissioner may revoke have not been separated from the circumstances under which the commissioner may suspend. And normally to prevent or to require a precise or a certain application of the power, those two should be separated. It should be clear what circumstances should give rise to suspension and what circumstances should give rise to revocation. But here under these links on A to F, the power might be exercised either way.
Thank you, CPC, for bringing that to our attention. May I suggest then that we perhaps send further instructions to indicate the thoughts of the technical team on the matter?
Well, could it just a query? Just a query. Is it the policy intent that the commissioner would exercise a judgment on the suspension or revocation, accepting that the penalties are in the event of revocation, that's a harsher penalty, and that usually that require a little more aggravating circumstance. But was that the policy intent, or as the CPC said that it wasn't, that really wasn't the policy intent, and for that reason we need clarity around the exercise of either suspension or revocation. I mean, is there an intent, there a clear intent or not?
I understand the position of the CPC that indeed you would want to separate it because, you know, as you said, the revocation is a much more severe consequence. And
but in circumstances, as I look at them, it could be, it's not dissimilar from appearing before a judge and the judge looking at the circumstance will really determine the severity of the penalty based upon the same set of facts or circumstance. And I'm not arguing one way. I'm just wondering if this is, if there is a policy intent behind it, or if in its absence, then we have to go through and discern and determine which of these circumstances would attract revocation, suspension, as opposed to revocation. Because the both penalty could apply to the same set of facts and circumstance.
yes, I agree, but I agree with you, but I think there's a lot of value in making it very clear the circumstances under which you may be suspended and the circumstances for revocation, because it would protect the commissioner when the circumstances are very clear from any allegations of acting improperly, and the commissioner can be properly guided. And then the person who's impacted, because a suspension of an authorization, depending on the nature of the authorization, even if suspension is for 1 day, could have very severe consequences. So it's very important that the person who is aggrieved will be able to say no clearly, oh, this is why I have been suspended, and then to be able to make representations between the period of suspension and revocation, hopefully with a view to, you know, avert an actual revocation. So to us, there is value on both sides in making the rules very clear.
No, I'm in agreement. I'm in agreement, but I say, I would want to just say that it seems to me you're going to be involved in a very difficult exercised, and perhaps you should be looking at rules to settle that rather than the broad clauses. But I leave that up to you. I'm just just tagging something for consideration as you proceed.
Noted, Member Hilton. We would, I may proceed.
Please go ahead.
Unless Member Hilton has another inquiry in relation to that. At clause 220, subclause 2, just an adjustment. The provision there says if any hatchways of a vessel have been fastened down or any documents and so on have been locked or marked and sealed, it is not to be opened unless authorized. But if one looks at subclause 1 as well as 3, well, 1 and some of the other provisions of subclause 2, you will see that there's reference to means of transport. And so the recommendation there is simply to delete the word vessel, if any hatchways of a vessel, and just replace it with means of transport to cover aircraft as well. We're also proposing at clause 245, disposal of confiscated goods. There it states, goods confiscated under this subpart shall be disposed of in such manner as the minister may prescribe. Having regard to the range of items, the suggestion here for prescribed tends to suggest regulations. The technical team is recommending that it be altered to as the minister may direct.
Sorry, going back to the recommendation that was made in relation to 222,
Yes.
that provision specifically spoke to vessels because it follows on the power that was given under 221C to fasten down the hatchways of any vessel. So that power was specific, or that fastening down was specific to the hatchways of any vessel. So if you're expanding 222 to speak of means of transport, then it would mean that, is it intended that 221C would then have to be expanded to give a power to fasten down the, well, I don't know if you talk about hatchways in terms of means of transport.
I noticed CPC looking at it at 221, looking at all of C, that means of transport is referenced at the end of it as well. May fasten hatchways of any vessel.
Yes, but it's speaking about the vessel found, sorry. That refers to the sealing of goods or documents found at the means of transport, whereas the fastening down is really specific to the hatchways of a vessel.
When I had conferred with the operational team, I was advised that it could include an aircraft as well. And so in which case then it would mean that C should be expanded. C should also then refer to means of transport.
All right.
CPC, those were my instructions, but I just did a quick check of the ordinary meaning of the word hatchway, and I see now, well, because a hatchway is the opening or hatch, but it says especially in a ship's deck. But I don't know if it means exclusively in a ship's deck. Hatchway is a passage giving access usually by a ladder or stairs to an enclosed space. So I do believe then that we could expand 221C to hatchways of any means of transport. And subclause 2 would be if any hatchways of a means of transport have been fastened down.
All right, agreed.
Yes. Another proposal, Mr. Chairman, touches and concerns clause 262. And we know that this is a very important provision. That's clause 262, subclause 2. And this is a provision that imposes an obligation on any person making any regulations or rules under the Act to cause those regulations or rules to be brought to the attention of the public by publishing, same on the website, and to allow for a period of consultation and so on. During one of the meetings of the Joint Select, the CPC had pointed out that this provision could have some unintended consequences. And she cautioned us to look at how this particular provision could play out in practice. The technical team looked at all the instances in which the rules or regulations may be made under the Act, and we noted that in the majority of instances, rules or regulations related to operational matters in terms of customs, procedural matters, and in those instances, it would be appropriate for those types of rules or regulations to be subject to public consultation. But there were some in which we consider it to not be appropriate. We had identified one, such as the minister's power to designate ports and customs controlled areas. On our review, the minister's power to prohibit the import and export, to prohibit the import of certain goods, or to restrict the import of certain goods as provided for under clause 249, subclause 4, paragraph A. In our thinking, this is a power that should not be subject to public consultation and really is an executive power. Clause 278 is another example where the minister can delegate some of his powers under the Customs Act. And again, in our view, this is not a power that ought reasonably to be subject to a public consultation in terms of that delegation order. And a few others, several others that we identified. We also reviewed what our international obligations would be, what is the best practice international recommendation. And when we looked at Article 2 of the WTO Agreement on Trade Facilitation, we saw that whereas customs administrations are recommended to implement consultation requirements, it is not as broad and far-reaching as we have it in this clause 262. And so we're proposing, consistent with Article 2 of the TFA, to implement some limiting words. And the words that we're proposing are, that the provision now reads, before any regulations or rules, these are the proposed new words, of general application relating to the movement, release, and clearance of goods under this act are brought into operation, this will take effect. And so what it would do is ensure that if it is rules relating to movement, release, and clearance that obviously impact persons, those should be subject to the consultation requirements, but the others would not. We're contemplating having an exclusion listing out exemptions, but we recognize that there was the risk that we may miss something. And so we are recommending instead that the provision be restricted in this way, but we do not think it to be an unfair or unreasonable restriction.
Yeah.
May I comment, Minister?
Yes, go ahead, Member Hilton.
First of all, I think I understand that there are events and decisions that perhaps should not be for practical purposes, not be subjected to this full-scale comment and period. However, I generally support, I believe when I saw it in the inclusion in this legislation, I thought that this was one of the innovative and modernizing effect of this legislation. I'm hearing a retrenchment of that. And I'm generally not in favor of a wholesale retrenchment, and I really am not. Because I think the transparency doesn't undermine the power, first of all. It simply conditions it. And for those reasons, I think a comment period, because even after the comments are there, the minister is well within his rights not to take on board any of those comments or all of them, if as the case may be. So I don't see the harm that would be done. If you tell me about, if I thought you were coming with something that by its definition was an emergency type of operation that would necessarily would not be really enhanced by a 21-day or the time period that is contained in the legislation. But none of what you have mentioned to me or said really would be affected by these requirements. And so I'm really not, unless I'm not convinced, and especially when you talk about a number of these exemptions, I am concerned. And I just want to say that I believe this to be one of the more enlightened provision and modernizing provisions in the document, in the new bill, and the new act. And I am loath to agree to any wholesale retrenchment of those provisions.
Thank you, Member.
May I just ask for a reread of that provision? Sorry. I just asked for a reread of the provision. I just walked away. I don't have the text.
It's 262. You want me to read the thing? Well, Edwards, you want to read it?
Yes. Clause 262.2, as it now in the bill, as it's now stated in the bill, before any regulations or rules under this act are brought into operation, the person responsible for making those regulations or rules, as the case may be, shall cause them to be brought to the attention of the public by publishing them on the public website of the Customs Agency, together with a notification inviting the public to submit comments on those regulations or rules within a specified period, not being less than 21 days before the regulations or rules, as the case may be, are brought into operation. And then 3 provides that the person responsible for making the regulations or rules shall revise the regulations or rules, as the case may be, as that person considers appropriate, having regard to the comments submitted under subsection 2 before the regulations or rules are brought into operation.
And you had indicated a clawback in what regard?
We are proposing to insert the word, to limit clause 262 to apply to regulations or rules relating to the movement, release, and clearance of goods. So it will be all the operation, all the regulations and rules dealing with, customs procedural matters. Those would be subject to the consultation requirement, but regulations, for example, that deal with the minister's power to prohibit the import of goods, right, to stipulate, that a particular item is prohibited from being imported, the minister's power to, make an order delegating his powers, the minister's power dealing with identifying items entitled to partial or conditional relief from duty, those would not be subject to the consultation requirement. I just gave some examples. As I said, the team, we sought to go through and identify all of the instances and considered where we thought it would perhaps be inappropriate. There are not many such instances, but on our review, there were some instances where in our contemplation, there may be instances where the minister needs to act quickly in relation to adding prohibited items to a list. Sometimes it has been necessary in the past to add an item very quickly to a list to say this item is no longer to enter the country, right? In response to maybe a particular disease that is entering our country and maybe impacting agriculture or so. Yes, ma'am.
No, let me again, I say that Madam Minister of Legal Affairs, Constitutional Reform, my general concern, as I've stated, is that there seemed to be a significant retrenchment on a clear policy intent, which I thought was one of the more innovative features. I recall, for example, when we discussed the whole matter of wharfage and the minister's power, vis-a-vis that of the commissioner and the minister, which we went into depth discussing and ultimately coming to a position. But even that, the minister then was in agreement that that ought to be, while it was not a common situation, that ought to be transparently done and exercised. So I mean, bearing in mind that the comment does not require the minister to take them on board, I still do not see the harm, and I would not be in agreement with a generalized retrenchment. And what this amendment seemed to be doing is to narrow the scope, I think, overly so, to narrow the scope of the comments to simply operational matters when there are other matters. Because in the end, what we're talking about is commerce. We're talking about, in many instances, people have investments, doing business. And yes, I agree that things change and there are events and decisions that have to be made in a broader interest, public interest. And those decisions lies with the minister. But I'm saying, since it does not unduly fetter the minister in the exercise, it's not taking away his ability to act in that era. All this requires is a transparency and a procedural requirement to ensure what we know to be an important part of our constitutional arrangement, a procedural fairness. And we're weighing that the exercise of the minister against business decisions that have been taken, investment made, and expectations generated around that. So to undo that simply by the wave of a magic wand, which we're accustomed to, and it has done injustice in many instances, we know. And I believe we need to be very careful and cautious about a generalized retrenchment on the procedure that we have agreed as a matter of policy.
Member Don?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. While I agree with Member Hilton in the transparency that needs to be done with any rules, regulations that we are trying to enforce, I still believe that the way how Ms. Hazel has couched it is very important as it relates to movement, release, and clearance of goods. I believe the minister, whichever minister forms is a part of a government, I don't think it's irresponsible enough not to understand the importance of investments and the importance of business and the continuity of business, but also the minister has a responsibility over and above commerce and commercial matters to ensure the safety of the population, and in terms of a decision that he has as a part of a policy of any administration to deal with. So I believe that the way how Ms. Hazel has done it is correct. And as it relates to the movement, release, and clearance of goods, and not to limit the minister in the other areas of responsibility that he has. Thank you.
Let me, if I might, a quick rejoinder, just to say, remember, Don, my point is a more specific point. I agree that the minister, that implies responsibility, implies all of what you have said. What I am saying is that this matter, this relates to customs and the exercise of the minister's power as it relates to the customs in both its operational sense and in its more wider sense. And my simple point is that the idea, the move away from this sort of Nicodemus exercise of power by any minister. I've been in favor, my position has been, is as it is from the time that we were in government. So it's not particular to any minister. I'm simply saying I believe it's a best practice. It's a direction in which of transparency, of procedural fairness, and I want to emphasize not simply transparency by sort of publicizing it and letting sunlight in. I'm talking about procedural fairness that I think is implicated here that we ought to protect.
Okay, this is something that we can discuss a little further. I can see the point that the customs agency is making. Recall that, regulations, the bifurcation that I think they want to make is that regulations don't have to go through Parliament. Parliament provides a transparent procedure for matters to be aired, and it happens all the time. Regulations are tabled, and in between the time when they're tabled and they're taken, persons who are affected, they call the opposition or they call members of the government, say, what on earth you introducing? Parliament, Parliament is the forum through which that transparency is exercised. What was intended by this is that the rules that the commissioner makes for operational matters today don't have a transparent venue for consideration. And the idea here is to ensure that we introduce that transparent venue, but not that we further introduce more sort of bureaucracy, right, in getting regulations that have to go through Parliament ultimately for passage. Parliament is there, and the transparency that it provides, just look at examples that we have had in recent times, right? Just the last few weeks, we passed 2 regulations related to customs. They sat in Parliament, one of them for a couple of weeks, and they're tabled and they have ventilation. No, so it's not a matter of a retrenchment. There's no retrenchment of the principle. The principle stands. It is just that, with this 800 pages of documentation, and as we can see, sometimes the intent is not carried through, and on a reread and a reread, you see that, and just have the courage to correct it where that is the case. So the principle stands, and it is indeed, Member Hilton, a revolutionary change to require that these operational matters that today don't have any transparency behind them, the commissioner can just, or don't have much transparency, commissioner can just, make the rules, that we're introducing a forum for those rules. But the matters that normally go through the Parliament, there's no need for us to add any time to that. And certainly some of the matters that I've brought through, even in my time as minister, we'd have a serious problem if we had a 21-day wait. There are matters that the industry, that various industries have to, accommodation is required. And in fact, let me give you, accommodation is required, and we have to expedite. And in fact, as you probably know, the need for expediting sometimes is even such that the custom and the practice has been over administrations that once the change is approved by cabinet, even before it can be drafted, right? And these are usually reductions and so on, effect is given to it so that, administrative effect is given to it. So speed is often of urgency, and introducing a 21-day additional period for matters that are going to go through Parliament, where we already have a procedure of tabling and then taking and debating, is probably unnecessary and would encumber the procedure. So I just want to, first of all, respond to the comment and the concern. There's not a retrenchment here. In fact, this revolutionary change that you cite is and remains intact. It is just that we didn't want to, the intention was not to capture the matters that are ventilated and are made transparent by Parliament, by parliamentary procedure. I hope that is a sufficient explanation.
Yeah, so Minister, my comment is that a follow on to yours, that Member Hilton has used a very strong word in terms of retrenchment. And I'm not connecting Member Hilton of why you have said that, and maybe I'm missing something, because it's a very strong word about retrenchment. Can you just summarize for me exactly what are your concerns, and not picking it up in your discussion?
Well, let me thank you for asking, Don. Let me say, and the word I've used is considered. The principle here is, as the minister says, and I agree, that its introduction in customs procedure is revolutionary. And so I will adopt the use of his word, revolutionary. No, it is revolutionary because it is accepted that for too long, some of these very important decisions have been taken by both administrations. It's not about administration. It's systemic in its application, and that for too long, these things have been more like Nicodemus in their taking, and they have had effects and adverse effects, and it's not consonant with commerce. You as a businessman in the thing, I think would fully appreciate that. But even more so, the smaller businesses, because they don't have your power and your reach, done, or companies like yours. And so they don't have a voice in many instances to appeal, even in small ways or large ways, much less legally. So when this was introduced, I had commented and remarked that it was necessary, it was advisable, and it's indeed revolutionary. Now, the minister makes, in his response, I think makes some important points, and in my first intervention on this, I said very clearly that I was listening to Ms. Edwards to hear about some emergency type of situation and events in which the rule or the provision would be limited or conditioned. But I didn't hear that. The minister, in his response, sort of pointed to, well, I think Ms. Edwards in her second clarification did make some points. The minister followed up by making some point about the need for speed and urgency. I say again that it is not unusual and not beyond us to make those kind of conditions and those changes to provide for those types of situations. But what I heard was a sort of bright line approach between operations by the Commission of Customs in the exercise of her powers, and to shift that to avoid where the minister exercises his powers. And the minister, quite rightly, makes a point about the parliamentary decision. But the minister, the powers are so great in the case of customs that there are some power that are really not, they may be subjected to cabinet, maybe authority, but the powers are very broad when it comes to customs and immigration. Those two areas have allowed for very broad exercise of power by the minister. And all I'm saying is that instead of just making a bright line separation between the Commission of Customs and the exercise of her powers and the minister and his exercise of his power, that we find something a little bit more limiting, and that does not make that broad scale exclusion. That's the point.
Minister Malou Ford, thank you, Member Hilton. Minister Malou Ford, did you hand up?
Yes, yes, Chairman. Thank you. To help the listening public beyond us in the committee, what I gather from the concern raised by Member Hilton and the response given by the technical team, I think Member Hilton's comments may give the wrong impression to those who do not understand. Why do I say this? The proposal for amendment is not interfering with the general principle of consultation before regulations are promulgated and brought into effect as a general rule. And you are correct that the move to provide for consultation in this way is a forward-thinking, revolutionary, and is in fact deliberate to enable commerce, not to disable it. At the same time, since customs involve revenue and border protection and sensitivity in the treatment of both areas, there may be instances when the requirement of the minister to take action in a short time is necessary, and the wide provision may do harm to that without harming the public who would want to have an input in certain matters. And I think what will be required is to strike the balance, but the public should never be left with the impression, based on the understandable concern you have raised, Member Hilton, that the government, through the proposal, is undoing the forward-thinking provision of providing for consultation in the passage and coming into effect of regulations. I think the explanation given by Hazel for a carve-out of certain types of provisions where the minister may be required to act in the interest of not only revenue, but in protection of the homeland is going to be critical. And in those cases where time is of the essence, the 21-day period may work against the benefits to be derived. So the issue may not be resolved here and now, given that the policy behind the provision was already settled, and there is also the process, as you know, Member Hilton, having been in cabinet. But I think what I would suggest in the interest of time is that the concern be noted, and I would indicate to Minister Clark and his team that we could look back to see how the accommodation can be made, because the explanation clearly indicates that a necessary accommodation has to be made for that provision without going too wide.
Thank you, Minister, for that. I think, Member Hilton dropped off, and he just called me just now. He's having trouble getting back on. I'm happy you clarified that for the listening public. The principle of transparency, that is the purpose behind this reform, and it is deeply embedded in 262. And what Edwards described does not disturb it. It calls, if the commissioner is making new rules under this act, it will require that there's a 21-day period of public consultation prior to those rules come into effect. As the minister just said, what is merely being sought is a carve out for certain regulations, some of which would go to Parliament anyway, in the interest of speed and efficiency. But what I propose, I'll have a further dialogue with Member Hilton, and we, next time we meet, we come back with a proposal that that clearly preserves the principles as Ms. Edwards proposed to do, but also addresses the need for carve out that has been described. All right, let's move on to the next one. In the meantime. You're muted. You're muted.
Yes, so one other adjustment at clause 95.2, which is just to tidy up for consistency. This is a matter we'd already agreed on. We had already made provision at clause 63 for the time period for transshipment goods to be sent out to be 90 days or such longer period as the commissioner may allow, and for goods for home use. And for all other customs procedures, it's 30 days or such other period. And so just for consistency, at 95.2, we would need to delete the words or such longer period as may be prescribed in regulations, just to avoid conflict with what we'd already agreed in. It was just a legacy thing that had been left in. And similarly, at clause 177.3, to delete the word rules and replace with the word regulations, because we had agreed that at clause 87.1b, that the cause is to be prescribed in regulations. So it's the same type of provision. So again, just a consistency matter there. And the others are just minor editing issues that we will just liaise with CPC on.
All right, thank you, Ms. Edwards. Minister Fort, your hand is still up. Is that a new hand or an old hand? Okay, thank you. All right.
Neither new nor old. But just down.
All right, so I think that brings today's business to a close. We're inching ever so closer to the finish line. It's with the schedules and from today's proceedings, I think everybody, and the proceedings of the last two meetings, I think everybody understands that the schedules are critically important, and it's very important that every X, every E, every dot, every T is accurate and conveys the policy intent. We have a few matters to tidy up, a couple matters where Jamaica Customs Agency needs to consult with the CPC for the appropriate wording to ensure the policy intent is captured. And there is one matter that I will discuss with Member Hilton. And at the next meeting, we hope that those matters that fall into the categories I just described, we'll be able to ventilate. Ms. Edwards, your hand is up?
Yes, yes, Chairman, just to answer quickly, unfortunately, Member Hilton is not on, but in relation to the question about the decision 6.1 of the WTO Valuation Committee, just to advise, he had asked what is the position of the WCO on the matter, and just to advise that the WTO Committee on Customs Valuation sits on the World Customs Organization Technical Committee, and the WTO decision 6.1 was adopted by the World Customs Organization, and it is included in the World Customs Organization's valuation compendium. So it has been formally accepted, decision 6.1, by the World Customs Organization.
Thank you very much. So at the next meeting, as I mentioned, we will ventilate and sort of finalize those issues where CPC has to opine, and on the matters that we sort of I want to have the opportunity to consult with Member Hilton on. Thereafter, the entire list of amendments will be produced. You have a draft of the amendments that were covered up to the meeting of October 7th. Clearly, there are more amendments from this meeting, and there will be a few other amendments at the next meeting. Hopefully, we won't need as much time for that. Let's see. And that is how I expect things to proceed from here. Where are we with the drafting of the report of the committee? Because we don't want that to take too much time after we have finished going through the draft bill. Can you just comment on that, Ms. Bailey?
Chairman, I intend to commence the draft maybe early next week.
So how long will it take you to do the report?
I'm not sure, Chairman.
Because I don't want that we have finished going through the bill, including all the schedules, have all amendments, and clearly it will take some time, but it'd be good if that time can be accelerated. But maybe you can advise me off air as to the time you expect.
Will do.
Is there any other business? Okay, date and time of next meeting. Do we have a day proposed, or do we have anything booked on the schedule? All right, so what we will do, because the work that we have to do, or the teams have to do, with uncertain duration, meaning that it could be a week, could be less, it could be slightly more. We will consult with the parliamentary calendar to see the date closest that we can get that allows the work that I described to be done by. And we'll use the same procedure to seek concurrence with members that date is convenient for at least a quorum to be formed. I want to thank you for your time this afternoon, members of the committee, members from Customs, from the Ministry of Finance, AG's chambers, as well as the CPC and Ministry of Legal Affairs. Thank you for your attendance today. I think we've made a lot of progress today, and the day is coming closer and closer to the day we'll table a revised, we'll table the bill with the amendments recommended by the committee. I hereby, at this point, it's just left for me to move for an adjournment of the meeting. Do I hear a proposal in Minister Dunn?
I propose for adjournment of the meeting, Minister.
Seconded.
Thank you, Minister. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Cheers. Bye-bye.